It's an honor to have our special guest. You would have no occasion to know this, but my relationship with the Stamper family goes back to my childhood. The uncle of our special guest, Larry Stamper, was my best friend when I was growing up. He later became the senior minister at First Methodist Church of Burbank and was mayor of that city. And I think almost everyone would agree the most popular politician in the city's history. So there is a connection that goes back a long way. Now, I remember him here in the context of the San Diego Police Department. I remember his rise to great status. And I remember his rise to great status because he was seen as progressive, enlightened, and forward-thinking when it came to the matter of law enforcement. I have thought, in general terms, that this city has been extremely lucky in the quality of our police department and our police officers, and particularly fortunate in the leadership that we have had. That's not true in all of our cities, but I think it's been true here. And I think he's been a significant part of that. He became the chief of police in Seattle and now has written this significant book called Breaking Rank. He's an extraordinary individual, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him back to his hometown. Welcome, please, Norm Stamper.
Thank you very much. I understand that this book is creating a bit of a stir in my hometown, and I'm pleased to hear that. I'm not happy to be labeled a liar or one who's engaged in sensationalism and so forth, but I do know that that goes with the turf when you set out to write a book that intends to provoke conversation and honest dialogue with differences about how most effectively to police our communities across the country, not just here in San Diego. I thought what I would do this afternoon, and I understand that I have about 25 minutes to talk at you and then a brief period of time for conversation, reflections, questions, that sort of thing, is to share with you a little bit about the memoir side of the book. My publisher says it's part polemic, which is basically emotional ranting, and part memoir, which is, you know, what's your life history and how come you came to this point where you feel you have to rant about what's going on in police work. I think I'm being unfair to myself by calling it a rant. There's a lot of research. There's a considerable amount of observation and personal experience in this book, and I stand by the facts that I have presented. But I certainly do understand how other people disagree with my definition of the facts. So as we get maybe a little bit deeper into the talk, we can create a better understanding of why I've come to the positions that I do embrace. My first experience with a police officer was when I was 9 years old, excuse me, in National City. I was born in Balboa Hospital, Naval Hospital, before the remodeling, considerably before the remodeling, and grew up in National City. Gary, my childhood pal, and I were tired of shooting out streetlights with our slingshots, so we went to Kimball Park to kick over the Little League fence again. And about halfway through our work, this big monster materialized out of the dark and enveloped us in a big cloud of dust. It was a black and white Dodge. And in the front seat were two National City police officers. They never budged from their positions in the front seat of that car, but after the dust had settled, they rolled their windows down and had a little conversation with Gary and me. And they let us know in no uncertain terms that what we were doing was very, very wrong and that we'd better not ever do it again. And in fact, we'd better not ever set foot in Kimball Park again. The driver, the talker cop, turned to his partner and says, "Get a good look at these kids, because boy, if we see you in this park again, that's it for you." At any rate, I think what offended me most is that they took the cigarettes that I'd stolen from my mother. And as they are supervising the replacement of the fence, they're in the front seat of the car, and I see these little orange dots as they're smoking Mom's Chesterfields. You know, what was that about? Talk about corruption in police work. That was just disgraceful. Gary had a not very pleasant thing to say about the police officers. It was an expletive, and I'm trying to clean up my act, so I won't share the expletive. But as soon as he characterized those officers, well after they had left, I said the same thing. Yeah, they are. At 16, with my brand new driver's license, I got a ticket for going 17 miles an hour through a 15-mile-an-hour blind intersection. When later I became a police officer, I did learn the technical term for that, and it's another one that I won't repeat. You can use your imagination. But it didn't endear me to my hometown police officers. I didn't harbor at that point any real, quote, anti-police sentiments, but I had this sort of vague uneasiness about who these people were and what they were about. At 17, I was playing in a rhythm and blues band, playing baritone sax, as a matter of fact. And on one Sunday afternoon, our band was rehearsing in Logan Heights. About 20 minutes into our rehearsal, there's a loud rap on the door. You can guess where this is going. Two police officers showed up. With absolutely no provocation, the one of the two officers who on this occasion did the talking poked his finger in the chest of the lead singer, who had been as cordial and as polite as one can imagine, to the officer, saying, I'm sure you're here because of the noise, we'll turn it down, so on and so forth. And within 5 minutes had called him two very, very unsavory, racist things. And I felt my blood boil. It was now personal, and it was different. Dave was not that kind of person. Dave was a good guy. He was a friend. I hadn't developed any particularly elegant or well-articulated view of police racism at the time, but even as a young white kid, I heard it, I saw it, I experienced it, I took it in. And when I coupled that with what I was watching on television out of Birmingham particularly, but throughout the South, when Birmingham Bull Connor sicked his minions, those snarling police dogs, the fire hoses, the batons, the kicks, directed at peacefully demonstrating civil rights protesters, that really tipped the scales for me. Icing on the cake, at 18, 19, and 20, as I'm living and working at the National City Pet Hospital, I got burglarized 3 times. On none of the occasions did the officers who did respond, somewhat slowly, but did respond, did they take a note? Did they take a fingerprint? Did they take a shoe impression? On none of those occasions did they return my stolen property, which consisted of my Uncle Bob's gray gabardine suit, which I wore at graduation, and it was probably worth $2.50, but it had some sentimental value to me, and it was my only suit. Took $15, which for me was a lot of money, and I still get emotional about that. My 100 R&B and jazz albums. To this day, I feel the pangs of resentment that those albums were stolen and not recovered. And here's the punchline for me, however irrational it is. The burglars did their job. Why didn't the cops do theirs? So now I've been underserved. I've been, I think, badly treated, although I certainly bear some responsibility for bringing it on. And I had this general vague notion of the police as oppressive or neglectful. And then I became one. And it's a logical question, I think, to ask why, and the answer was I needed a job. Matt's mother was 18 years old at the time. We were freshly married, living in a veterinary hospital and listening to the dogs yelp and yowl all night and the cats shriek and people rap on my bedroom window at 3 in the morning to tell me that Mitzi's nose is warm. And it was not a pleasant experience, so we sort of needed to move. And I needed a new job, and that's the motivation for taking the police test. I wasn't one of those people, clearly, who wanted to be a cop since the age of 3. The guy that I was accompanying through the civil service testing process was. He had this incredible passion, some would say obsession, for the job. And he ultimately did succeed and took a job as a police officer in Chula Vista after he failed San Diego's testing. Within moments, of my swearing in as a police officer. It might have been months, more likely weeks. I have to think perhaps it was days. My vaguely idealistic notions of becoming a cop. I'll help people. I will stop people from hurting other people. I won't use the N-word. I won't write CS tickets. I'll be a responsive and responsible police officer. I don't know how long it took for me to morph from this vaguely idealistic and very impressionable young 21-year-old into a bit of a thuggish rookie as a police officer, but it clearly did happen. My favorite trick, as I pointed out in the book, was baiting people to take a swing at me so I could choke them out, so that I could capture their carotid arteries between my bicep and my forearm, lift them up on my back, and whisper in their ears as they're losing consciousness, "You're gonna die, asshole." People say, Stamper didn't do it. Stamper's a nice guy. Sure, he's the charitable term would be unconventional. He's got some weird and twisted ideas about police reform and so forth, but he's nice. I can't see it, as a Seattle police officer said, can't see it. I don't believe it. Well, anybody who was not born when I became a police officer in '66 might have a hard time with that. Any police officer who was around in the '50s and '60s who did not behave the way I did would obviously have a hard time with that. And I get that, I understand that. I'm talking about my experience. But I'm also here to tell you that I didn't develop that pattern of behavior in isolation. Trust me when I tell you that I had my eyes opened on any number of occasions and saw practices that we can best describe as unfortunate on the part of a fair number of police officers. I got my comeuppance when I was about 14 months into the job. I had arrested a 19-year-old puke. That was our term of reference for long-haired people who disagreed with us. For short-haired people, there was another term, but once again, I'm trying to clean up my vocabulary. So I arrested a 19-year-old puke who had copped to a couple of beers, but clearly was not drunk, and who had given me a lot of lip. This was at Fairmont University in the parking lot of what was then Pat Brillo's Mexican restaurant. I won't forget that night, not because of the arrest. It wasn't all that uncommon for me to make arrests like this in those days. He bailed out of the car after I'd stopped him and was flailing his arms and calling me every name in the book and generally questioning my ancestry and so on and so forth. Long story short, I decided he's going to jail. Then I found a reason. Booze on the breath of a 19-year-old, that's probably drunk in a public place, unable to care for himself or the safety of others, a violation of 647F of the California Penal Code. So I hooked him up, put him in the backseat of a police car, drove him to jail, did not screen test him. I'm proud to say. Police officers know the term. Many citizens do not. I did not, for example, in my police report, have to write that the undersigned proceeding south on Fairmont in the 2800 block had his progress interrupted when a yellow and white striped cat darted unexpectedly in the path of the police car, forcing me, I see Don smiling, forcing me to slam on the brakes and thereby producing a waffle-like effect on the face of my prisoner in the back seat. That's called a screen test. And there are some police officers who have no memory of that ever occurring to anyone in the history of the police department. Trust me, it happened. So I go to court. The guy, you know, you get a $29 bail on a straight drunk. What do? You pay the fine, you go on about your life. Well, this kid, I was 3 years his senior, wouldn't have it. He decides to contest the arrest, so I show up in court, but I know how to handle this. I've seen it done by senior officers. Never done it myself, but I knew exactly what to do. Go up to the second floor, as I recall it, of the county courthouse then at 220 West Broadway, sidle up to the prosecutor with a wink and a poke, suggest you might want to dismiss this case. Why? Well, it's kind of a skinny pinch. What do you mean? Well, you know, he had a really bad attitude and he had copped to drinking a couple of beers. and he called me a pig. Officer Stamper, never forget this. Very tall, slender, very nice pinstripe suit, tortoiseshell glasses, hair slicked back, looked like a Hollywood lawyer. Officer Stamper, does the Constitution of the United States mean anything to you? Now, what nerve did he have to ask me that question? I'd seen this done before. I'd seen the eye rolling, okay, this time. Well, he told me this time. I'll dismiss it this time, but you had better never, ever bring me a pinch like this again. I was enraged. I don't remember ever in my life being that angry, which is another way of saying I don't remember ever in my life being that afraid. He caught me. Now, I was clearly afraid, one branch of the criminal justice system talks to the other branch of the criminal justice system, no matter how common or uncommon the practice may be. When you get a report like that, and you're only 14 months into the job, you're off probation, but you're still pretty new, it could be toast for you. So I was scared of that, to be sure. But there was a much deeper fear working, and it sort of took the form of the question, how in the world did I come so far in such a breathtakingly short period of time to the point where I was saying things and doing things I had never done before in my life and which had appalled me before I became a cop? I cite this by way of introduction to some reforms that I think are necessary in police work because it speaks to the power of the culture. I will not ever blame anyone else for my actions, for my behavior. But I have to say, in the interest of full disclosure and honesty, and to repeat myself, that I didn't learn that behavior in a vacuum. I worked with some senior officers and around some police officers who've been around for a time, who did what I did and worse. And I have, in fact, told those stories in the book because I don't want the book to be a textbook. I want people to pick it up and read it and say that these stories are compelling. Yes, we have progressed. Oh my God, have we progressed in police work, generally across the country and certainly in San Diego. Before I move into the suggested reforms that I think are necessary to rearrange the way the molecules are organized, to rearrange, if you will, the values and attitudes and beliefs and practices of those of us who behaved the way I did as a rookie, and to actually strengthen crime fighting and community relations as well, let me say that I believe the San Diego Police Department is today the most honest, professional police agency that I am aware of. And I have spent a good deal of time visiting other police agencies. I'm very proud of the limited role that I had in some of the reforms. I see Ann Odell sitting here, who transformed that police department into one of the premier, not one of, the premier domestic violence prevention and enforcement agencies in the country, a legacy that she can be proud of forever. It's a great police department. It is full of very competent people. It was full of competent people in 1966 when I became a cop. But there's still something wrong, it seems to me, with the structure and culture of policing that continues to give rise to what we often call unfortunate incidents or tragic incidents. And I think it would be dishonest and cowardly of me not to confront directly the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, and the other brands of bigotry that continue to exist institutionally across this land. San Diego has much to teach the rest of the country. San Diego still has plenty to learn in confronting the isms, the bigotry, the behavior that creates a chasm between community and police. Having said that, I think there are several external kinds of reforms that are necessary. Most of you have already heard what I advocate. This will not endear me to you if you take the opposite point of view. There aren't a whole lot of police officers who agree with me on this. I think it is time to withdraw yesterday from the war on drugs. I believe that the war on drugs, waged to this day to the tune of $30 to $50 billion in local, state, federal law enforcement and international aid to countries to help them curtail the supply side of our habit. You know, last week, picked up the newspaper, I read about the brand new police chief in Nuevo Laredo on the Texas border. Remember that? This is some poor guy who's the head of the Chamber of Commerce in this border town in Mexico who has been railing about the violence in his community. Horrible, horrific violence. Gunshots all day into the night. Innocent people caught in the crossfire between drug-dealing gangbangers. That's not a Mexican problem, that's an American problem. The profits associated with that illicit trafficking in that city are clearly the result of the attraction of the American thirst for drugs. Anyway, he takes the job reluctantly of police chief. He says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a police chief. He pins the badge on, and 4 or 5 hours later, he's shot dead. It just seems to me that when we originally enacted the first narcotics laws in this country, which were clearly for purposes of regulation and revenue, go back to 1914, for example, that we had to, in the wake of that decision, criminalize the behavior and demonize the users. To me, someone who uses drugs and does not commit any other crime, I'm talking now about illicit drugs, and does not commit any other crime is no different from a person who uses alcohol or smokes cigarettes. Those drugs taken together, as we all well know, account for far more damage collectively, exponentially greater health costs than all other drugs combined. So I do in fact favor decriminalization as a right of Americans to ingest, inject, inhale, sniff, or snort any substance they want to find God, to feel good, to feel better, or simply have fun. I am not promoting drug use. I am not suggesting that anyone who does not take drugs. On the contrary, I get it. I understand how damaging drugs are. But if we can conceive of creating, through decriminalization, let me put this differently, by disabusing ourselves of the belief that we must sanction people who use drugs, quote, responsibly, then we open the door for definitions that shift radically from our current definitions. Drug use becomes a medical problem. Drug abuse, certainly, a medical problem and a public health problem. We extract our police officers from the perilous front lines of the drug enforcement war. There are a number of other external pressures, but in the interest of time, let me now turn attention to what I think is necessary internally, and I'll make this brief, way too brief to create the kind of understanding that I think is necessary. Policing is organized as a paramilitary bureaucracy. It is paramilitary, it is bureaucratic, and it has been for decades. That organizational mechanism is a function of concerns that date back to the 1930s that policing was clearly corrupt. From sea to shining sea. Across the country, we had plenty of evidence of deep-seated corruption. Well, how are we going to clean that up? Let's get rigid with our organizational model, command and control, ranks of supervisors and managers and executives and functionaries who've got all kinds of specialized positions and so forth within that structure. Created, once again, with a good purpose, and that is to seize some control over the unacceptable behavior of cops on the streets and in the higher offices, including what we'll call the corner pockets of police agencies, the administrative complex. And it worked. It really did, for the most part. It did a lot to help cleanse police agencies of corruption, but it also left an unfortunate legacy. I can't think of an organizational structure less amenable to trust and communication, to treating one another within the organization with dignity and respect, and valuing the imagination and the creativity of each and every employee up and down that chain of command. Nor can I think than the paramilitary bureaucracy. Nor can I think of a less functional bureaucracy when it comes to creating honest, authentic relationships between community and police, which leads me to my conclusion. Any police department that talks about community policing but has not put the community first is not practicing community policing. It's a partnership, to be sure, and if it's to be an authentic partnership, that means something approximating 50-50, or my preference 60-40, with community the senior partner. We exist to serve the community, to protect and serve and work with the community, to fight crime, and to honor civil liberties, and to help promote social justice. Thank you.
I do want to conclude by saying that the role in this society is of a critic is often a hard one. But I think our responsibility as citizens is to require of those who are public servants that they be open and honest with us, and that they have the courage of their convictions. And the fact is, there are very few people that I know of whom that can be said more truthfully than Chief Norm Stamper. Let's thank him very much.